This episode of Rookie Hunter is brought to you by the Wild Sheep Foundation. Adventures in sheep country can change your life, and as residents of BC, we're very fortunate to have 3 different species of sheep in our province. After attending the Wild Sheep Foundation's annual convention, Sheep Show, in Reno, Nevada, we got to see what conservation looks like firsthand. The Wild Sheep Foundation's ability to raise and put millions of dollars on the ground each year to keep these majestic animals on the mountaintops worldwide is unmatched. The Wild Sheep family is a diverse group of people from all walks of life, and membership is open to anyone. Whether you're a seasoned pro, it's your first time on the mountain, or you just like to see sheep on the hillside, you can sign up and join today. Kelly and I are lifetime members, but you can become an annual member for just $45. You can also become a member of the Less Than One Club, which is the only club you want to get kicked out of. If you've never taken a North American or international ram, you can join us in the Less Than One Club for an extra $25. Plus, Less Than One Club membership also includes entry into a draw for 3 separate Doll sheep hunts, which will be given away at Sheep Show in 2019. For more information on the Wild Sheep Foundation and to become a member, head over to wildsheepfoundation.org. Hey, welcome to episode 94 of Rookie Hunter. It's another one from the Peppermill archives here. Very excited to have Shane Mahoney back on the show for a second appearance. He's going to give us an update on the Wild Harvest Initiative. Some of you guys might remember that from the episode we did way back when. It was still in the very early stages. But since then, they've collected just like a mind-blowing amount of data. And we'll get into it, and he'll explain everything to you and what's going on. He does mention that they'll have a website coming out soon here within the next couple of weeks. So as soon as we know what that is, we'll let you guys know and update you on that. So as I'm sure you're hoping, yes, we did get another story out of Shane, and you'll find it at the end of the episode. Talking to Shane on Skype is one thing, but to sit across the table as we did for this episode and have Shane tell you an incredible story is pretty awesome. So very lucky that we got him in person, and hopefully we can do that again in a few months here with him. Otherwise, everything related to the show is up on our website, therookihunter.com. You can stream the show from there. You can check out our gear on the gear tab. You can check out all of our past guests. Everything's up there, including our contact information. The best place to follow along with us and engage with us would be on Instagram. Just search for Rookie Hunter Podcast. You'll find us on there. In this conversation with Shane, we do talk about Sheep Show and how these events are important to conservation. If you want to become a member, you can do so by going to the wildsheepfoundation.org. Also, don't forget to support our knife sponsor, North Arm Knives. You can find them at northarmknives.com. Well, let's get into this one. Sit back, relax, crack a cold beer, and enjoy this episode with Shane Mahoney. Shane, welcome to our hotel room.
Thank you very much. I get to spend a lot of time in hotel rooms. So.
This is home for you.
I can't tell you that I'm delighted to be in your hotel room or anything because I spend too much time there.
They all start to look the same.
They certainly do. Although it's quite a bright, airy one you have
it's
here.
Not too bad, yeah.
See the mountains out there. That's some saving grace.
Yeah. Well, Shane, last time we talked to you was over Skype, so it's nice to have you in person. One of the things we talked about, and I think it was fairly new at the point, was the Wild Harvest Initiative. I'd imagine you have all kinds of updates for us and some stats to share. So,
well, I do. As for just so your listeners know, and who probably won't remember the last time for sure, it's an attempt to assess the full harvest of wild meat and fish by recreational users in Canada and the United States. Mm-hmm. It's a massive project. It's never been undertaken, and therefore every piece of information that we gather is a new finding in that sense, because no one, not the federal government in Canada, nor in the United States, or any of the NGOs or state agencies or provincial agencies ever decided to do this. And the reason I'm doing it is because, number one, I believe wildlife, generally speaking, is the poor cousin to all other natural resources on the planet, and that people know how to value timber, they know how to value minerals, they know how to value hydropower, they know how to value oil, But for some reason, this resource, which has carried us through our entire existence on the planet, is something that people sort of take for granted or see it as some kind of sideshow. And that's always aggravated me incredibly. And so, one of the reasons for doing this study is to try to give wildlife more value and to point out that it is part of our food sustenance system. It is part of our food security. And if we manage land and landscapes in the right way, we could actually provide a great deal of more of this natural food to citizens. Whether they're urban citizens or rural citizens makes absolutely no difference, particularly in our countries like Canada and the United States, because anybody can learn to hunt and learn to harvest these animals, as people can learn to fish and do the same kind of thing. So that was number one for doing it. I spent a lot of time in my roles as executive director for sustainable development and various research programs in Newfoundland and Labrador, to know that whenever we have a debate in resources, wildlife gets the low end of the stick. And no one is able to tell me that there's anything different about that. And it's the same in every province in Canada. It's the same in every state in the United States. And it's the same in both countries at the federal level. And so we can either allow that to go on, or we can try and change it.
Right.
One thing that matters to people today is food. I want them to understand that those wild resources, the waterfowl and the moose and the deer and the brook trout and all of these species are part of a natural food chain for human beings, and a far more natural food chain, in fact, than domestic livestock, and a much older food chain, and a much healthier food chain in the main. And so I felt that was a gateway into the hearts and minds of modern people, and so I wanted to do it for that reason. I also wanted to start talking about animals as real things, because and about hunting as a real thing as well, because what's sort of happened is that people talk about the economic benefits and how many jobs there might be created because people might hunt or fish in a region, and how much taxes are being paid in the United States on excise taxes. And of course, what all that does is it gets us to focus on human processes. And I keep asking myself, where's the animal in all this? Where's the real talk about the animals in all this? How come they, which are at the basis of all this, are sort of ignored in these kinds of discussions? And they're ignored by academics, they're ignored by policymakers, they're ignored by governments, they're ignored by even the big NGOs. I mean, they basically talk about other things and assume, I guess, that people realize it's all about animals. But hell, why not talk about animals? They're what make us possible. So that's another reason why I launched this, and also I am interested, of course, in seeing hunting and angling continue, because I believe both of those activities lead to personal growth. They entice people to spend time in nature, and in that way, they help build a constituency that will fight for the natural world and fight for wild creatures. And I firmly believe that we have a responsibility to do that. And I want to give people some realistic way of understanding that hunting is beneficial. And even if they can't make the connection between hunting and conservation, because there's a few steps they have to interpret there, they can certainly understand that if you shoot a moose and you clean and butcher that moose, that you do have 400 to 500 pounds of the best possible meat that a human being can consume. And despite some people want us all to be vegetarians, and I respect that particular point of view, overall in the world today, meat consumption continues to increase. It's going to be a long time before the human species decides that it wants to give up access to the very form of protein that enabled us to become what we essentially are. So while I love my leaves, believe me, there's a lot of primate in me because I can eat leaves forever. I love meat too, and I think a lot of people are built the same way. And I wanted them to understand this. So we started this a few years ago, and when we first did the first podcast, we were just sort of getting started. The first, I guess, big thing to report is that we've now built up an alliance of supportive partners on this, which, by the way, has included from the very early days the Guides and Outfitters Association of British Columbia. They have been stalwart supporters of this from the very beginning. But we now have about 35, I think it is 36 partners that go all the way from the Wild Sheep Foundation and Sitka to the Elk Foundation to Whitetails Unlimited to Mystery Ranch to the states governments in Florida, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, and are currently in discussions with 4 or 5 other states that have expressed interest in coming in. We have private foundations, 2 of them that are in support of this that are really not associated with hunting per se. And we're very hopeful we're soon going to see a health foundation come into this. And people so the coalition itself is demonstrating that we can bring governments, industry, and NGOs and private citizens together. Because without naming them, there are actually 2 small businessmen in British Columbia, in addition to the guides and outfitters of British Columbia, who actually support that. So some people are just supporting it of their own volition. So that's number 1. Number 2, we have now, working with 63 jurisdictions in Canada and the United States, we have compiled, for the first time, a full compilation of the species and the numbers of individual animals by species that we harvest through hunting in Canada and the United States. We have compiled all of the body weights for all of those species, the gross weights, the harvest weights. We have calculated all of the dressed weights, so what's left of the animal if you get rid of the head, the hide, and the innards, and so on and so forth. We have also now compiled virtually all of the existing fishing data similarly for all jurisdictions. That data looks very different because, as you know, with a fishing license, you can fish many days, you can catch many different animals, you can hook and release, So we're working with the American Fisheries Society now to figure out how we're going to handle that. But we basically now have, in the case of hunting, the data in there enough to be able to talk about the scale of the harvest, in other words, in raw numbers. And we are now also about to come out with our first estimate of value based on the price of pork, beef, and other commodities in the food system.
Nice.
And we have an academic program associated with this, of course, because we want people to understand that this is not just some biased kind of introspection by a group of hunters or something like this. Our first master's student has graduated now in the program at Trent University. And we will be submitting our first publication on the work to the scientific journals in about 3 weeks' time. And once we get the facts and figures in the science journals, then we'll start to release it publicly.
Right.
And the reason we're doing it that way, so that people understand who might listen to this, is that if we come out first with the information in the public domain in newspapers and magazines and things like that, we cannot very easily get it into the academic literature because it's already exposed, it's already out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to get it into the academic literature for 2 or 3 reasons. Number 1, to make sure that the academic community understands the importance of this and the scale of this. Number 2, that once we get it there, if it's published, then of course it gets credibility because people have reviewed our methods and how we did it, is it accurate, and so on and so forth. And it opens us up to criticism, which will improve our processes. I'm a firm believer in this. There's definitely a lot of time in that world. And also then we can still take the information and begin to release it in podcasts or magazine articles or newspaper op-eds or interviews with journalists and so on and so forth. And what I can tell you at this point in time is that the harvest is in the billions of pounds.
Wow.
And the value of it is going to be quite extraordinary. And if you break that down into number of meals and so on and so forth, and that's just with regard to hunting. So when you start to bring fishing into this, what we're going to realize is that 50 million people harvest this food in Canada and the United States every year. And, that amount of food is not an insignificant amount of food.
Right.
For some people, it's their primary source of meat and fish. For some people, it's just something they have, every now and then because a friend hunts or fishes or something of this nature. Mm-hmm. The other thing we've accomplished since the last podcast is we intend to develop what we call a sharing index for wild harvest of fish and wildlife in Canada and the United States, where we ask the hunting community how many people have they shared their harvest with, what did they share, how much did they share, who were those people, etc. And we have finished the first survey. It takes about 6 months to go through the multiple questionnaires that you send out. We finished the first survey, and we did it first in the state of Texas. And so now we're analyzing that data as well, and then we'll do that in other regions and so on and so forth. And what we've noticed along the pathway with this is everybody thinks it's a good idea. Nobody looks at this study and says it's a bad thing, or it's are negative towards it. That's why we're building the coalitions we are, and that's why many people are contributing to it and helping to make it work. And because the harvest is about all harvests, so we will be compiling information on wild mushroom gathering, wild berries, wild fruits, and all this kind of stuff. Then, of course, a lot of people see the connections between themselves and the others. So they may not be a hunter, but they may certainly be a berry picker. They may be a berry picker and an angler. They may, there's all these kind of combinations. And what we're really finding is that, there's common ground here. And eventually the world is going to realize that, focusing on certain of these activities, such as hunting, for example, and saying, that's really passé, that's really something, we don't need to do anymore, and so on and so forth. Well, for a great many people, it is providing a vital source of food for them. They're sharing that food with a lot of other people who take enjoyment from it. And I'm personally not against enjoyment in life. I don't know. There are some people who seem to be against enjoyment in life, period, but I'm not one of them. And we also, of course, are able to talk about things when we start discussing food, about how people feel about things and what they value and what kind of a lifestyle they want to live. That suddenly opens up a lot of discussion with the medical community, for example, about healthy food, with the fitness community about lifestyle and fitness and so on and so forth. And it's proven to be an extremely exciting and worthwhile project. And we're now about to bring on 2 additional graduate students to continue with other aspects of this. And we, of course, are starting to line up conferences now where we'll present our data and so on. And once we get that first wave of information out there, then we start on the real work, which is the broad communication of this information by region, by species, why it matters, who it matters most to. Could we, in fact, increase this harvest if we wanted to? And the answer is yes. Right now, we could increase it with snow geese, Canada geese, white-tailed deer. There's no question we could increase it. So we have a lot of outreach things that are now in the works. We have a film with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and the Yeti that we hope to have ready for a release in July, where there's going to be a major event held by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation in Park City, Utah, where we're going to have country and Western music performers. We're going to have a big festival around wild harvesting, and we're going to have the Elk Foundation kind of convention or whatever one might say at the same time. And those are going to be repeated. And so then what we hope is going to happen is other groups, maybe chapters of that organization, other entities will start their own kind of programs like that, and it's happening anyway. I mean, it's not just because of this study. People are into wild game and cookbooks. And
definitely.
It's a phenomenon. I mean, and it's not going to go away because, the world is going to get more, not less concerned about the quality of the food it eats. And the great thing is it's a real connector between the urban-rural divide, which is far too significant and can be so harmful at times, because a lot of the people who are most concerned with healthy foods and healthy lifestyles and who want to live forever and die of nothing are a lot of people, young people living in urban centers. They jog and they skateboard and they do everything possible, and they eat only coffees that have milks made of, every ounce of fat extracted and all this kind of thing. And that's all great. And yet they are a perfectly, they're perfectly ripe, I would say, without wanting to be a poor pun here, but for this kind of discussion, right? And we see tremendous human possibilities here because um, one of the things we hope to have a discussion of, and at some point in time, we probably should do this. You know, everybody who harvests from the wild, and I may have mentioned this the last time, I don't know, but it's a phenomenon to me, and we often overlook phenomenon. We just take them for granted. But everybody who harvests anything from the wild is driven to share it, right?
Certainly.
And it doesn't matter if it's hunting. Wild meat, obviously, people share. We know that. But people who pick berries and make jams and jellies, they ought to share it. People who bake homemade pies made from wild things have to share it. Wild mushrooms, people have to share it. It's just there is something fundamental about this, that when we take it from out there and bring it onto ourselves and possess it, then we seem driven to want to share these wild commodities. And
Yeah.
I think there's an amazing story at a human level to explain this. So that's another benefit that we see coming out of this with regard to the communication.
Yeah, we had taken a spring bear this year, last year, and we had a work event and cheese and crackers around Christmas. So I brought in some bear sausage. You're kind of wondering when you bring it in, like, how's the reaction going to be? There's not a ton of hunters there, but there are a few. So bring it in. I put my little Post-it note on it. Like, I'm not going to trick anybody. I can tell you what it is. And the curiosity, like, everybody was super curious about it. Created a bunch of conversation. Almost everybody tried it. There's maybe one or two people that didn't, and they didn't have a visceral reaction to it. But it was more like, no, I'm okay. Like, I respect you.
Yeah.
But it's easier to do that in person for sure, than kind of what people see on the news.
Well, I think that is true, and I think also people have to come to grips with something, and the hunting community needs to come to grips with this too. There is no fundamental difference between harvesting wild fish and harvesting wild mammals from wild birds, and we know that currently it would simply be impossible to end the harvest of wild fish on this planet. The human cost will be absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
Billions of people would suffer from malnutrition. Hundreds of millions would lose employment.
Yep.
And so I ask myself the question, why do we make such broad distinctions? I mean, in our boats, we pursue sentient creatures that live, that reproduce, that respond to stimuli in their environment. They know when they're cold, they know when they're warm, they know when light is coming to them, they know where food is, they breed and display, they reproduce, they, in some cases even, they even care to some extent for their young and certain species of fish and so on. And they have tried to avoid us as we try to capture them, and we do capture them, and we kill them in large numbers, and we butcher them, and we consume them, and so on and so forth. There's no way out of this kind of equation. And so why people can conveniently separate one group of species from another and say, well, that's okay, or at least we're not going to protest about that. Yeah. But over here, we're going to be really fundamentally opposed. There's a certain lack of consistency there. Now, having said that, I know that we feel differently about mountain gorillas than we feel about mosquitoes. And that should be the case, or at least it is the way it is. So I know this, but nevertheless, to sort of dismiss the harvest aspect is hard and remain consistent and logical. You could argue against other aspects of hunting. I don't understand how the person wants that experience, or I certainly can understand if they just want a particular kind of animal or a size of animal or something like this. But sort of separating that harvest of fish and birds from the harvest of other living creatures like reptiles, amphibians, and fish just seems to be inconsistent from my perspective. And I think we should have that debate. We should have that discussion.
Absolutely.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, you've been busy since we last talked to you.
Yes, that program is really running. I mean, we have the largest database now in the temperate world, and
Yeah, I'd imagine.
there's a lot of interest in it from the international community because food security and harvest of wild things is may not be a big thing for somebody living in the heart of Vancouver. Who It's not their experience, or the heart of Toronto. It's not their experience, and same way with the heart of any large urban center somewhere in the world. But we have to remember that billions of people in this in this world still rely on the harvest of wild things to sustain themselves, either primarily or secondarily in their lives.
For sure.
Yeah.
You might have touched on this, but how many students do you have working with you?
We have we have a variety of people working on the project
Yeah.
now, as you might imagine, database people, and we have an economist hired. We have other representatives who work part-time in association with it. We have one master student who was sort of our vanguard student, who has just graduated from Trent University in Ontario. He graduated in December of this year. And now we have two other projects that we're placing graduate students in. And we're trying to choose the projects in such a way that it's like a funnel. So the first student looked at really broad categories of harvest and related that to issues of land productivity and access right across the continent, from Canada and the United States, and also based on the human footprint. I mean, how much human activity, their degree of urbanization, and so on. So we're looking at big, broad questions like that. Then underneath those studies, we'll get more specific studies, and then under those studies, we'll get more specific studies. And then as the information comes out from those different layers of studies, of course, we'll start to send it out to the broad public.
Yeah.
Right? So there'd be a constant stream of this kind of thing.
Did you release some elk numbers already?
Did release some elk numbers because we have some. What we do for the partners in particular who are in this alliance, we provide some, kind of teasers. Just some things to show that the progress is being made.
Yep.
But we've also explained to all the partners that while we have data now on all species, and there's more than 150 of them. And that's the other thing. No one could ever tell us how many species we hunted in Canada and the United States. No one could tell us that number. We now know that, and so we have the information, but we are, explaining to the partners we have to bring it out first in this pattern.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just take all this and just sort of dump it all out there on the public and so on. And we're going to be very strategic too about, we have a strategy being developed. We have a brand new standalone website. It looks fantastic, which is going to go live probably by the end of February.
Okay.
I would say. That's going to make a big difference. We have been working really hard on our social media program. So the kind of Shane Mahoney Wild Harvest Conservation Visions world has just broken through 800,000 Facebook followers. We will break through 1 million within probably maybe another 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
So,
Awesome.
we just put anything out there now, and we're really, we're hitting, 1.8, 1.9 million people or something of this nature, just
That's great. Yeah.
ourselves. And Facebook has taken very close notice of this, in fact, and we've had a lot of actual discussions with Facebook. And we have plans for other platforms as well, but right now we wanted to focus on one to see what we could drive.
Yeah.
Now, you have to remember that we have 36 partners, including Bass Pro, for example, Cabela's Bass Pro, and Sitka, and the Elk Foundation, and Sheep, and now the National Wildlife Federation is thinking of joining. So if our hope is that we wanted to show that Conservation Visions could develop a big social media outreach on our own. And we're small, we're tiny. And the hope is that we can encourage all our partners in sync to start to release this information. We have the capacity in this alliance now to reach tens of millions of people. So this is not going to be waiting for others. We will have I wanted the capacity to be in the engine. I didn't want to have to rely on others and beg them and ask them and so on.
Yeah.
And of course, podcasts like yours are all part of the strategy that we're looking at.
Right.
Yeah.
How can we hit as many as possible, different times, different ways, some kind of sequence, so that we're constantly dripping this information out there?
Yeah.
Because this is not a project. This is a relentless innovation around how we value wildlife, how we value wild food, how we view the outdoor experience in terms of harvesting, and how we view hunting. And the only way that we're going to make a difference is not to have a 1-year campaign doing something, or
Right.
criticize people who are opposed to hunting, or do anything of that nature. None of that's going to work. We've been at that forever.
Mhm.
It's not going to work. It's ridiculous. We need to find common ground, and then we need to just keep sharing that over and over. And of course, that will link us with rural peoples around the world, not just here.
Yeah.
It will link us with First Nations and Aboriginal peoples around the world, which,
Yep.
much of the international institutions are becoming, very concerned about, of course, rightfully so. And so we have all of those kinds of benefits to this program. And if we stay the course, we will have the knowledge. Nobody will be able to say we're talking through our hats. We
Right.
will know, for the first time, we will know these numbers, and we'll be able to say, well, what about we doubled it? What about we tripled it? What about we looked at landscapes, instead of wanting those landscapes to only grow trees, we wanted them to grow moose, let's say, like real food. I mean, we can grow moose and rabbits like weeds. We know exactly what to do to produce gazillions of them.
Yep.
White-tailed deer the same way.
Yeah.
Caribou are more problematic
Right.
in some other species. But so we're really forming a foundation here for a transformative process. 120 years ago, approximately 110, 120 years ago, we had a similar phenomenon when we took the idea of harvesting wildlife out of this commercial market hunting slaughter that was going on, and made this amazing change to make it a individual, non-commercial utilization of a resource,
Right.
and incentivize people to support it in that way. Well, the Wild Harvest Initiative is going to make the next one. I mean, not alone, but the idea has come. The time is right to make this
Absolutely.
transition.
Yeah.
So we're very, very excited and really encouraged by it. And, we have some big international organizations that, are asking to copy it now and do it in other places, and see where it goes.
Very
Yeah,
exciting.
We'll follow it along.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see all the data that comes up,
Yeah.
because that's
coming soon. Once we get our first, layers out there published, we will then start. Then it will be in the public domain, of course. But then we'll start to exercise that, and we shouldn't be naive. There's a certain amount of shock value maybe around.
Right.
this
Yeah,
too,
true.
people see because nobody has any idea. You can ask anybody in the world except me and 2 or 3 people who work with me how many animals we harvest on this continent, and I can assure you that no one can tell you that.
Right.
But we can, and we
Yeah.
soon will. Right?
Yeah. It seems obvious now that you're doing this, but it seems like this should have been done a long time ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. But
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the way we are. It's like kind of overlooking this sharing idea.
Yeah.
And we got all kinds of cute little things that we're talking to companies about. Like we're always, developing ideas, for how to present this, because, one of the big problems we have the biggest problem we have on the planet is we think we're different. Humans are
Right.
different. I don't buy that.
Yeah.
And never have, as I think I may have said. I mean, I really, this is not just a kind of, I'm not saying this to shock listeners or something. I just don't believe there's very much difference at all between us and other forms of other animals.
Yeah.
I really don't. We happen to make things like this hotel, and they make dens and nests, and, we happen to produce technologies that do amazing things. They can fly from north to south, from the Canadian Arctic to South America once, and turn around and do it all over again without anybody showing them a second time. I don't know any human could do that.
No.
So there's just amazing. We all species have amazing things. We have some amazing things, and I just don't see really any difference. Really, any difference between us, and so. I think that a big part of the problem in the world is we really do, and we think we'll escape the limits of the planet. We think we're not going to be subject to some great big disease epidemics that have wiped out animal and human populations in the past. And, we have all these ridiculous notions, and we can keep going with the climate change problems we have. And it's not going to be, but the truth of the matter is, we're just another one of those. And, it's a hard lesson for humanity to learn. And because of that, we overlook a lot of really important truths about things, and so that's why every now and then we stumble on something, and you say, "Well, geez, of course we should have done that a long time ago. Why didn't we ever think of that?" Well, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, exactly. So Kelly and I have only been hunting we're going into our 6th season. And we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but before we started hunting, we were under the impression that wildlife was doing really well in BC. It's kind of the image that BC has, right? You think of killer whales and moose and caribou.
Yep.
Well, once you start to hunt, you get a better picture of what's actually happening, and things don't seem so good. So it's tough in a lot of ways to be a hunter and start to consider all these conservation issues. And our logo is actually it's the caribou, and mainly that was sort of inspired by the 2 herds in southern British Columbia, which are now, I guess, there might be a couple of them. They're capturing them, right? So there's only a couple that are left to be captured. And it's kind of it's a big eye opener, because that's been a known issue for decades now, that these guys have been struggling, and
nobody's been hunting them.
Yeah, we haven't been hunting them, so that's not the issue. So what do you think we can learn from this example of a declining population? And we're now at the point where we're trying to breed the last remaining 6 from 2 different herds.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of what you say. Number one, just coming at it from some individuals who have started hunting. You can't be successful as a hunter in most cases unless you develop some kind of knowledge of how to go about this. You just don't plop yourself out there and all of a sudden come home with a 1,400-pound bull moose. It doesn't happen that way. And no matter if you are very experienced, lots of times it doesn't happen that way. But what you remarked is, wildlife is out there. I'm a citizen in the community. I go to the bank every day and I work there, or I'm somebody who works in the service industry, or I'm a medical doctor or whatever. But I know wildlife is out there. Hey, I think it's doing okay. I don't really know. Well, the people who tend to really know and become better at knowing are the people who spend the most time out there. And in particular, the people who spend the most time out there searching for animals, which of course is what hunters do. I've spent all of my life really as a tiny boy, and I grew up in a circumstance where I could do that with animals and nature, and it was just all we had really. And it was, and I can tell you that if I go out simply for a walk, even if I went out as a biologist, doing the things I was doing, my intensity of search is not the same as if I'm hunting, because of course the idea is to possess one of those creatures, right? This is what drives hunting: possession. And most people don't realize that, but that's the fundamental thing that's driving us to possess. And I look at those experiences otherwise, and I realize I can have some knowledge of the natural world. Oh, I saw an osprey. Oh, we saw 2 deer today, and so on and so forth. But the really detailed understanding of how many did I see? How many tracks did I cross? Were there as many tracks as last year when I was here? These kinds of things. What the non-hunting public fails to understand is the good hunter, and not the good hunter is successful. I mean, the hunter who enjoys it and who wants to be a part, they are studying the natural world in a very specific way that gives them insights to abundance. Because it's about abundance. They want to find one of those. They want to find some mallards, or they want to find some black duck, or they want to find some deer, or some moose, and therefore have an opportunity to harvest one. So that's a really, really important point. And of course, if you really want to become knowledgeable about your place in the natural world, hunting is one of the most amazing ways to understand it, because when you hunt, you pay attention to wind, You pay attention to the cries of crows and cackle of ravens. You wonder why jays are doing what they're suddenly doing. You wonder about how strong that wind is and which direction it's coming from. You look at moisture on the ground and you're looking for tracks. You're wondering how old those tracks are.
Yeah.
You see animal droppings. It's no longer, oh, well, there's some moose poop. It's, well, that's very fresh. That was only a little while ago that animal passed. All these little small things are suddenly seeping into your mind and into your consciousness. Same way about the relationship in habitat and animals. The casual observer doesn't think much about it, but there's a reason why, certain animals are found in certain circumstances. Black-capped chickadees are found in black spruce forests. They're not found in other places. And similarly for other small songbirds, every animal has this kind of habitat association. But until you're out there pursuing them, looking for their tracks, looking for where you saw them, where they might likely be for a harvest, you really don't think about that in the detail.
Yeah.
So that's a really important casual point, I guess, that
absolutely.
you made there. I think when we come to the issue of species that are declining, and we speak about caribou in particular, whether in British Columbia or wherever, first of all, species are declining at an incredible rate across this planet.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people don't realize because they can watch Planet Earth or something and see still amazing things about wildlife, just how much we're losing every day. But experienced people do know that. When you come to wildlife abundance in a place like British Columbia or Canada, of course, the world thinks that we're awash in wildlife, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They think of Canada, they think of BC, they think of the Rockies, they think of, these amazing shots of sheep and goats and moose and caribou on the tundra and all. The world thinks that this is what it's like. Well, we have some really serious problems in Canada. And we have some really serious problems in British Columbia and in Newfoundland and in Quebec and in Manitoba and so on. And not just about nondescript species like, the triple-banded, rockhopper lizard or something. I mean, these are big, iconic beasts like moose, for example, like caribou and so on, that we now have real problems with. And you ask yourself the question, how does a fabulously wealthy, fabulously educated, fabulously progressive, rule of law, wealthy nation like Canada, with relatively few people, massive expanses of land, incredible numbers of natural resources, get itself in a circumstance where it has so many problems? And, but the truth of the matter, we do. So right now, take caribou, for example, the iconic animal of the Canadian North, but which at one time, of course, was distributed much further south. Turn of the 20th century, we lost the band of the southern populations in Wisconsin and in Maine and Minnesota and places like that, and retained just some there in the Idaho, border regions and so on, Washington. And then, of course, we come up into Canada, and we now have a circumstance in Canada where it is difficult to come to any other conclusion but that populations and forms, woodland versus migratory, barren ground and so on, mountain, that it's very difficult to come to any other conclusion but that every component is either currently threatened or endangered or soon will be.
Right.
Now, that's the circumstance with this iconic ungulate across one of the most advanced countries in the world. And what seems to be the only response to this by the federal government is to throw money.
Mm-hmm.
And in various regions, we seem to be becoming accepting of the fact that, what we're going to do is we're going to capture a few females and put them in pens and have them give birth to babies, feed them, ourselves, and then eventually release the babies and so on. Nothing wrong with these well-intentioned pieces of work, but my God, it's a bit surreal, isn't it? That's where we are with this animal.
Mm-hmm.
And, caribou follow these, I studied caribou for 30 years. Caribou study these very long-term perturbations and cycles. They always have. It is basically a density-dependent, food-related phenomenon. They get high, particularly some of the woodland populations in the migratory big herds. They get high. They depress food quality and abundance. Those systems collapse. as they're coming down from the high, the predator populations are rising in response to that
Right.
big population. So then they start to fall faster and faster because the predators are gobbling up and the food is not there for productivity and so on. And then you have these long periods when caribou are rare. The question for us is whether we now, with the changes coming on the landscape from extraction, resource extraction, because of climate change and all those various factors, whether they will come out of this next low.
Right.
And British Columbia is struggling with this enormously. It has, wolf control programs that it's attempting to benefit some of this, and it's trying to work with, some of those little captive experiments, as I talked about, and so on. But the bottom line is that caribou are in deep trouble in British Columbia, and yet caribou are not alone. Moose populations, as we well know, in many regions of the province are not doing extremely well.
Yep.
Now, there are different reasons associated with that, but there are also some similar reasons associated with that. And as I said, with the case of caribou, they're a different beast. You can have moose in your backyard. You can have black bears in your backyard. You can have wild turkeys in your backyard. You can have coyotes in your backyard, but you are not going to have caribou in your backyard.
Right.
They are psychologically a different animal. They need distance. They need space. They need things that moose don't need. Moose don't require to the same extent. In the case of the moose, as I said, we can grow moose. I mean, Sweden, has at times harvested as many animals in a single year as Newfoundland has had on its island. And of course, we've had it up to 120, 160,000 moose. In a single year, they've harvested in some cases that, because they manage their forests in a way that, not just for moose, they obviously extract timber,
right,
but they do it in a way that thinks about maximizing wildlife populations as well. A very relevant question for policymakers in British Columbia, whether they're with the Liberals or with the NDP, is a question of, is the province managing its forested lands in a way that's giving due consideration to wildlife?
Right.
And I think that's an important question for every citizen of British Columbia as well. Unfortunately, we get captivated by big industry to some extent, big forestry, big energy development, big things. They become big stories.
Yeah.
And we sometimes forget that if we just use the knowledge that we have, we could create much better opportunities for both the natural world and for human beings. We've been compiling wildlife science, landscape science, since the natural history movements of centuries ago. And we have an enormous amount of knowledge about how to do things. But very much that is overridden by the basic commitment to constant increases in economic growth. And of course, Canada has embraced this. I don't care who's in power. Canada has embraced that exactly the same way as any other country in the world has, as the United States of America has, as most of Europe has, and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, we have victims. And there's victims on the human side in terms of displaced opportunities for work and small-scale enterprises. And there are victims in the other parts of the natural world with respect to wildlife. So, and we could be doing, and this is the frustrating thing for me, is we could be doing such a better job than we are. And of course, you don't put them back after they're gone.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's you can't just fool around with it and brutalize it and then think, 20 years from now we'll all be wiser and smarter, and then we'll maybe put all this kind of back together again.
Right.
It's not how it works.
Right.
Yeah, it seems even with the hunting community and the big parties like the Outfitters or the BCWF, it seems like not just those two, but everybody. There's a lot of things we have to talk about ourselves to try to get on the same page, because we all want the same thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like that's almost a little bit of wasted energy in trying to, we should all understand we all want the same thing, and those coalitions are very important.
They are, and they're the only way really to influence political elites. You can't fight. No one can doubt that there is a significant marriage between big business and government around the world. I mean, I don't know how anybody could disagree with that.
Mhm.
And so, and I'm not saying that's because the people involved are morally corrupt or, or anything of that nature, but that's just a reality. There's power in size and wealth, and power has access to government, and wealth has access to government, and that is the way it is.
Mhm.
And whether it's a democracy or it's an oligarchy, it doesn't matter. There's a connection there. And the only way, therefore, to bring ideas that matter to the common person to the forefront is for those people to unite somehow into a broader force, a stronger force. And it's funny because we have the capacities today to do this through electronic media and so on and so forth. We can mobilize people very quickly, but of course, that's not our problem. Our problem is the problem you mentioned. The problem is we cannot get people to commit to elements that they agree to and ask them to stop spending all their time focusing on the elements they disagree with.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's true in British Columbia because it's true the world over. The broad NGO community in the hunting world, and it's no different than in the non-hunting world or the anti-hunting world or the education world or the medical world or whatever. I mean, human beings are tribal at heart, and they kind of maintain this kind of tribalism until absolute crisis takes over, and then you see them come together. It just seems a shame that it takes us so long to do these kinds of things, and when we know that we're in one of the greatest extinctions, if not the greatest extinction phase for life on this planet, I guess that raises the question: when is our crisis going to come? I mean, when are we going to decide that we actually have a crisis?
Right.
When there's nothing left, and the only thing you go out and you see is a house mouse or a starling, and and that's what everybody's clapping for because they can come home and say, hey, I saw a mouse today.
Yeah, and I caught it.
Yeah.
That's when I'd be happy I was a hunter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's your point is very well taken. I mean, we need much greater unity, but I think there is another approach to this problem, of course, and that's to give rise to new organizations. They will eventually become tribal, but there is in the early days a certain amount of innocence and purity of thought and idealism in new organizations. And I think we need new organizations to rise up now on both the environmental side, if you will, the more protectionist side, and also on the more utilitarian side. We definitely are at a time right now in this third revolutionary phase, as I call it, where we need new organizations to come forward. And I would suggest that Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is an example of one of those that's just spontaneously arisen.
Yeah,
it seems.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's true.
We could talk about just, issues in BC all day long, and I had more stuff that we wanted to cover here. But since we're at Sheep Show, the Wild Sheep Foundation, wondering if I think a lot of people look at an event like this from the outside, and they see people with big wallets and they're buying tags, and it doesn't really make much sense to them. They don't really understand what's going on here. But how do you explain these types of events to people and their importance for conservation?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of different ones, obviously, and each of the conventions and the organizations that hold them have personalities. They have slightly different views on things and so on and so forth. And first of all, I believe that we need every effort we possibly can muster for the conservation of wildlife in the world, and that means that's why I don't have any have difficulty with very different and polarizing views. I know we need protected areas and we need protectionism at times. There's no question. I know we need endangered species acts. There's no question. I know we need sustainable use approaches that work. We need all of those things, and in a world that's facing the trouble we are right now, we need everything, and we need to explore every possibility. So we have in the hunting world, then, that one component of all this. We have conventions that run from more what we might call the sort of the more middle ground, if you will, in terms of economic profiles and numbers of people who engage in activity, all the way to other areas where mostly people are looking at, international hunting, which is more expensive and costly, and not every person is going to be able to engage in it. And then we have examples within that international hunting world where some opportunities are provided to people, but they're provided in such a way where they can pay truly very large amounts of money, but those large amounts of money go back into conservation. There's no question that under those circumstances, there's only certain people who are going to be able to play in that game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a reality of life. There's
Yeah.
no question about it. And I can understand why for some people they say, well, that's not fair because I can't be part of it. But my view of it is that it's one other component that demonstrably does a fantastic job. So you take the very expensive tags that are sold, hunting tags that are sold at a place like the Wild Sheep Convention. Yes, there's only a handful of people who may be able to compete effectively for those, but by raising that a large amount of money and making it exclusive to some extent, they provide a huge amount of resource that goes back into the management and conservation of wildlife. Now, do I want everything to be that way? Of course not. I don't want everything to be that way. And but I do think that each of these conventions, whether it's the Wild Sheep Convention or the Dallas Safari Club Convention or Wild Sheep, as Safari Club International Convention, whatever, all of those conventions have a certain focus and a certain process and a certain clientele, if I would say, and a certain membership. But all of them raise extraordinarily large amounts of money that actually go to helping conservation in various ways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just feel that, and I have lots of hunters who've talked to me about those circumstances and say it's not fair, it's not legitimate, it's becoming a rich man's this and so on. But there is a lot of opportunity that's not associated with those big price tags in a lot of different parts of Canada and the United States and elsewhere in the world. And again, I have a very, very simple code. My code is what works for wildlife, I'm in support of. And what doesn't work for wildlife, I am against. And I think these conventions, the Wild Sheep Foundation is an amazing organization, has a strong conservation ethos. It has invested huge amounts of money in research and translocation of animals to rebuild the populations of wild sheep. I mean, no one else is doing that, right? I mean, this is a phenomenon, and now they're becoming more engaged in the international world in places like Asia and so on, and trying to bring that model there to help conservation in those countries. Is there a certain amount of privilege associated with some of those activities? Yes, there are. But the people who have that opportunity are people who have been fortunate in life in one way or another to acquire a certain amount of financial capacity. But the bottom line is not whether somebody has that opportunity and I do not. The bottom line is whether that opportunity that person has is helping conserve wildlife. That's the question. And I think the answer to that question, in the case of this organization, the Wild Sheep Foundation and its convention, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, we agree
absolutely.
with that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, we're lucky to live in BC, but it's because of these types of events that Kelly and I get to go on a sheep hunt this summer, right? So it's, yes, these people can pay for these opportunities, but it will trickle down to us at some point, and those opportunities will continue for guys like us too.
Well, and for the people who are involved. I mean, not everybody who's at this convention are people who are able to, experience those big expensive hunts. But you have people here who are guides and who are outfitters and who are people with other businesses and so on and so forth. You have to remember that part of that engine is also, sharing dividends, so to speak, with all those people and their personal lives and their families and their enterprises and so on and so forth. So you've got to look at the question of the greater good here. And it's a contentious issue in some quarters within the hunting world. There's no question about that. But again, I boiled my criteria down into that very simple equation, and that's why when I see things in the hunting world that I don't believe are conservation supportive, I'm not in favor of those either. And I think when I first started talking about these ideas and talking about putting conservation first, I can tell you 30 years ago, there were a lot of people who had strange looks in the audiences when I would speak about those things. And I'm not just saying because it was me. I mean, that was just true. They just really didn't figure out where this was coming from.
Right.
But now, as you know yourselves, it's a pretty broadly accepted idea now that it's not about conservation, I mean, let's not bring it forward.
Yeah.
For one thing, the public is not going to tolerate it.
Yeah, there has to be a sustainability at the least.
Yeah, there does.
Yeah.
And I think more and more the world is asking us, and not just the world, but legislation and policies like you hear about enhancement policies with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and others. They're not only asking anymore, is it sustainable? In many cases, what they're actually asking now, as proof of right, if you will, is that it actually enhances the opportunities for wildlife. I think those standards are good.
Yeah.
I think those standards are good. You know, I'd like to see those standards apply to a lot of other things. I'd like to see industry asked those questions. Well, not just in an environmental assessment, which I dealt with for many, many, many years. You know, are you going to cause a problem for wildlife? Maybe we should be asking those individuals, well, what are you going to do to enhance wildlife when you go in there and you build that mine? Or what are you going to do to enhance wildlife when you go in and build that dam or that transmission line or harvest that timber? I think that's a pretty goddamn reasonable question to ask those industries. But nobody, the world isn't there yet.
Yeah.
But the world will get there. The world will get there.
I think so.
Yeah, Mike and I we booked our first sheep hunt this year, and we'll be flying into the Rocky Mountain Trench up north. And we were curious if you've ever hunted sheep.
I have never hunted sheep. I've been in the mountains where sheep are, but I've never hunted sheep. I've just, well, first of all, coming from Newfoundland, where I did most of it, of course, we don't have them. And it was just never an experience that, offered itself to me, I guess. And the other thing, I guess, it's a much more restrictive opportunity, right? It's not like, say, deer hunting or moose hunting or turkey hunting, all of which I've done, or elk hunting, which I've done. You got to really find your way in, so to speak. And they live often, not always, but most cases, they're living in places where it's a little harder to get to than a whitetail.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And so you've got to plan quite an excursion to be able to take it. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a part of the world that we're pretty excited to spend some time in, and just even the planning and scoping out areas and looking at maps. It's so much fun just leading up to it. So,
it is, and plus the landscapes that you'll be in, because the beauty about the mountainous landscapes, of course, is that you have visibility.
It goes forever.
Yeah. That's an amazing experience for human beings. Particularly if you're up in regions where psychologically, in many cases, predator numbers are low, which is often the case, particularly if you get up really high.
Right.
And most times human beings like to be in a circumstance where they can partially hide and partially see in natural landscapes. So they like to be on the edge of things. They don't like to be out in the middle of big open expanses, except when they're in areas where they feel they have the commanding view kind of thing. So psychologically, mountains affect us in that kind of way. Whereas if you were plopped down in the middle of the Serengeti, you'd probably feel just a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
It's funny. There's an eagle right behind you on the wall there.
Yeah. So it's they're very, very special places. Obviously.
Absolutely,
they have been in the lives of traditional and indigenous peoples forever. Mountains have always been special things for them.
For sure. Well, we're almost out of time here. Have you got a quick story you want to share with us?
Quick story. Okay, I'll come back to another story that involves caribou, but it's not a story so much about them. I believe the last time I was on your podcast, I talked about the two battling stags that died and so on, which was remains a very, very profound memory for me. But this was another incident that took place during the rut, and that is. So much happens at that time of year because the fall, all, of course, the ungulates are out there breeding, and they're all in their regalia, and it's all pretty amazing. So I was studying rutting behavior in these animals, and this particular time, which was very common. I was alone. I had my pack on my back, and my binoculars are around my neck, and my spotting scope and tripod carried, and of course all of the behaviors, the tending of the does, um, the elaborate courtship between them, which people, unless you watch closely, you don't see it going on. But there's constant avoidance of eye contact between the male and the female, and so on and so forth. All of that is interesting. The bush thrashing, the hawk rubbing, where the males urinate on their joints and rub essentially their glands together there. It's all fabulous. But the fights, of course, you can't help but be excited by the battles between these big males. So this was a morning where you often heard them when you couldn't see them. The landscape's pretty open, but it rolled somewhat, and you didn't have to be very low before you missed something that was going on just across the way. And again, just an amazing morning. Snow had fallen, but it was only a small skim of it, and cold, frost everywhere. And I heard the clack, the antlers. And sometimes you'll have a clack, clack, and it ends, and it's probably just bull sparring. But this was obviously a fight that was taking place. So I scrambled and got up to, where I could see them, and hid behind some, what we call junipers. They're a form of larch. And I sat there, and these animals were just intensely battling. They would separate and come back together again. And it was one of the, these prolonged fights, which are not common. And prolonged means minutes. It doesn't mean hours, obviously. And so no animal can stand that, nor can a human being. But anyway, I was watching this very intently, and the females, as they always do, as I explained before, they were watching too, and to see what was going to happen in this particular circumstance. No one else with me. Of course, there was no one anywhere on that land for probably 150 to 200 miles, I suppose. And I was watching, and of course, once they get so intense, you can be very comfortable watching them, because they're totally preoccupied with what they're doing. And even the females, they'll sometimes see you, but they're focused on it. So I was watching this take place, and just amazing to see them, how they stand the strength of one another, and so forth, and balance and counterbalance. Because in caribou, it's all wrestling, of course. It's just a wrestling match. Anyway, I suddenly became aware that I wasn't alone. And I very slowly turned to my right and looked down, and there was a fox sitting right next to me. A patch fox, looking right, it was right next to me, and he was transfixed on this fight. And I can still see on the end of his vibration, his whiskers, I can still see the little beads of ice frozen on his whiskers. And I looked at him. He didn't look at me. We looked at this fight, and I kept wondering. First, I thought maybe the animal was rabid, or maybe there was obviously something peculiar, why he didn't smell me, why he didn't know what was going on. He stayed there. The fight ended, and the stags separated, and one chased the other, and then that was the end of that. And then I looked down, and he simply stood up, and he trotted off, went towards the caribou, and then veered, and then began seeking out little places. And I watched him move across that landscape, poking his nose in here, poking his nose in there, until eventually he disappeared. Now, the question that came to my mind, first of all, that was probably as close to a wild animal accepting me, even though it was very brief, but accepting me as just a part of the natural environment. Why he didn't smell me, or whether he did smell me and didn't care, or whether, like myself, he was transfixed by something else, and he literally sat there and watched. And then he was just a normal fox. I mean, he wasn't injured. He wasn't slow. He looked beautiful. He was full. He had amazing coloration. And he just went off across that landscape. And I can't explain it. And it was. I mean, that's why you do the work you do, because those experiences, and there's others, they only come after years and years and years and years. I've seen lots of fox. I've seen them cross in front of me. I've seen them with their kits. I've found dens and all those kinds of things. But this particular animal, on that particular October day, on a beautiful morning, watching two magnificent bull woodland caribou fight on the barrens of Newfoundland, I and a fox watched that together.
Yep.
And that's I mean, it's an absolutely priceless experience. And if you look on my website, you will see some sketches of things made by an artist, and one of them is of a fox, is one of the little pencil sketchings that's there. And that came, I happened to relate this story to him while we were preparing the website, and he went away and he came back with a series of sketches which I didn't know he was going to do, and one of them is of a fox sitting. And yeah, it was a amazing day. So that's there's probably a dozen or so of those kinds of experiences.
We'll have you back on for another one.
Yeah,
I was thinking you need to do like a compilation of short stories from Shane Mahoney. I would buy those for sure.
people have suggested that I do it. At some point I may well, because there have been there have been experiences, but they're so rare, and anything could have upset that. You get better the more time you spend in wild country. You get more animal-like. You probably smell differently. You probably react in ways that they understand much better. You're more predictable. You're like another animal. They know what the bear will do. They know what the caribou will do. Well, all of a sudden, maybe at some point because they're sizing up nuances all the time, animals are. That's why people say they see a big predator amidst a group of animals and they say, well, why aren't they running? They're only going to run if they think it's necessary for them to run.
Right.
The lion can walk through the bunches of impala at times, and the impala will just flick their tails and go ahead feeding and just keep watching him until he shows some sort of intent. They're not going to do it. And I don't know if that was part of it, maybe because of the fact that I was in tune as much at that time and sensed something and did not do this, and frighten him away or something of that nature. Maybe he was watching me from behind before he came up next to me and figured I was just another tree or something like that. I don't know, but that was, it's like it happened 30 seconds ago. It's just absolutely amazing.
Well, it kind of brings us all full circle with your point that we might not be that much different than them, and you guys sitting there almost as peers. Watching this thing happen.
Well, see, I do believe we're peers. I know this offends some people, and they probably think it's kind of, but I mean, I really, truly don't see any difference. I mean, and as a matter of fact, in many ways, I feel we're really insufficient. I don't think we always were, but I think we've become insufficient. And the simplest test of that is, though other creatures don't look at us and say, "Oh, those are humans." I mean, they just look at us. We're just another thing that moves around and does things. And so, any of us who have had animals in our lives, domestic animals like, say, dogs or cats or whatever, even fish, for goodness sakes. I mean, it's true. They don't. Cats are a really great example. I grew up with cats, but not in my own home. There were cats everywhere. People had them to catch the mice in the barns and so on.
Right.
But I always had dogs, but I never ever had cats. And so it's only, relatively recently, 15 years or so, that I've actually had cats. And cats, as you know, don't beat themselves out, extending themselves for humans, right? They're not like dogs that jump up and kiss you and, all this kind of stuff. But every time the two cats come into a room where we are, or I am by myself, they become the subject of the attention, right? They come in, you can watch them scratch themselves, you can watch them jump up on a table, you can watch them roll over, you can watch them play with a sunbeam, you can watch them jump up in the window and scratch to make sure you raise the blinds sufficiently that they can watch their television, as I call it, when they look outside. But they really don't give a rat's ass that you're there.
It's true.
And so you're with them for 10, 15 years. You share your life with these animals. And every day, every time they come in the room, that happens. It's not like it's once in a while that you get that notice. They come to the door or they're lying on a step. You got to bend down. You got to touch them. You got to scratch their ears. They roll over on their back. Well, you got to scratch their belly. You got to do these kinds of things. You got to feed them. You want to see them eat their food with gusto. You don't just feed them and walk away. You want to, oh, they really like that. So you got to get more of that at the grocery store the next day because that's the kind of food they want to eat. We are preoccupied with these others. And they are not preoccupied with us. It's like I said recently in an interview, and that we could disappear tomorrow, and the rest of creation, the rest of animate life, would not give a damn. If they disappear, even individuals amongst them disappear. And all of a sudden it's a problem for us. It's a sense of loss. And you see it in all kinds of examples that people don't think about. I mean, if we walked down the street and saw a stranger coming towards us, man, woman, young, old, child, wouldn't matter. We'd no more let them lick our face then, and if they did, you'd recoil in horror and think these people are obviously very weird. But we see a quadruped called a dog, that we call it, coming towards us. Never seen it before. Don't know the person that's with it. Have no context whatsoever for this animal. Get down, say hello to the animal, which is maybe happy to see you, may not be, depending on its disposition. And then lots of them will simply sniff your face and lick you all over. And you stand up and you talk to this other human, and both those humans think that's pretty normal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely insane when you think about this, and that's what we do. And people go anywhere. They go hiking. They go anywhere at all. What's the story they tell? Yeah. Yes, they may come back and say, we saw a beautiful sunset, the landscape was amazing, it was an incredible waterfall. But you can be assured that the highlight of their story is going to be that they saw an eagle, they saw a bear, they saw, it could be just a bird that they saw take an insect out of the air, or something. It could be anything like that. Is what they will remember as the most important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing that we, despite where we live and how we live to this day on this planet, that we retain that deep, deep, deep connection with animals. And that may be the only hope that we all have.
Yeah. Shane, thanks a lot for taking your time on your day here for us.
Very welcome.
Sitting down with us. And we'll gladly share all the information as it becomes available from you guys. And so please do keep in touch. And sounds like you might be in Kelowna, so maybe we'll see you sometime soon.
Absolutely, that could very well be. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm seriously considering being there. So that's only awesome. 2 months or something, something like that.
Good. We'll keep in touch. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
This episode of Rookie Hunter was also brought to you by North Arm Knives. North Arm Knives are handcrafted and sold directly through a father and son team right here in British Columbia. Choose from a selection of outdoor knives, kitchen knives, and custom engravings from NorthArmKnives.com. They ship internationally and guarantee all of their work. Kelly and I have put their products to the ultimate test and give them our stamp of approval. Head over to NorthArmKnives.com.